This is the MHS Pawdcast, the online radio voice of Metuchen High School.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Metuchen High School Podcast, the online radio voice of MHS. I'm Kalegi. As you can see, we have a panel today, as we had promoted. This is the 2020 America panel discussion that we're having today, along with myself, as always, Josh Hyman and Sarah Terracina are here. We also have an English teacher here at Metuchen High School, Miss Volosin, who's also in charge of the National Honor Society and Empowerment Club at the school. And to my bottom right, you see Tyrone Ross, who's a Metuchen High School alum. He helps out with the track team. He's a founder of 401 and also a fellow podcast host, so it's great to have both of them here today. Obviously, these last few months, the pandemic have been wild, but these last couple of weeks as well, ever since the killing of George Floyd last Monday, have sparked protests throughout the nation, some violent, some peaceful, and there's been a lot of discussion about how these changes can take place. I'm going to start with Josh and Sarah first, and I'm going to start with you, Josh. I mean, as a student, just learning about everything that's happened, what are your impressions of everything that went down with George Floyd and everything going on at this current time in America?
Yeah, I definitely think that what happened with George Floyd is totally unacceptable, and I think I pretty much speak for everyone here where that was just a gross overstep of police power, and it was just horrible to watch. And I'm very glad that all 4 cops are now being charged and that hopefully there will be justice for him.
Mm-hmm. And I want to bring it over next to Tyrone because I was watching his Twitter stream the other day, and one interesting quote that you had on the situation was hurt people. And I thought that was an interesting take on everything, given how everything going on with the pandemic and nobody's really in a good mood right now. Do you think that has kind of fed in to some of the response that we've seen during this whole George Floyd situation?
Yeah, absolutely. But before I continue on, I just want to say to all of you, my heart goes out to all of you that have lost your school year and so many things that have to be changed. So hopefully you guys hang in there, be well. This is something that is going to undergird you and support you in the rest of your life. You'll never forget this time. So try and turn it into a positive. Freshman through senior, this will be a positive. Just lean into it. And it'll be something that you can, remember for the rest of your life and build on. So my heart goes out to you all for that. I could only imagine if I lost my senior year of high school or any year for that matter. Yes, I think what you're seeing in this country right now is a lot of hurt people. And yes, hurt people. But I think what we're seeing now when we turn on the television is a mirror. It is a mirror of what America has been lacking. A mirror of what America has been lacking to put into a younger generation that see no way out of our current circumstance. You're seeing the plight of Black people. This is a Black issue. Make no mistake about it. This is a Black issue. This is something that has been happening in this country for hundreds of years. And now I think we are in that, right? If you go back to the 60s and that revolution, then here we are now. This is our moment. So I think you're seeing a lot of hurt. You're seeing a lot of frustration on both sides, right, of the issue. But America is hurting. There's a lot of empty souls. There are a lot of what I said in my walk and talk are zombies. So many people who don't have anything inside of them except for the ability to lash out. And I think we have a responsibility now to help each other heal, regardless of color. But more importantly, as I think before we were recording here, is the same way Black history is American history. Black lives mattering means all lives matter. Right? Because we are one and the same. We share the same soil. We eat the same food. We go to the same schools. So we have a responsibility now more than ever to pour into one another.
Totally. And I think what you mentioned about the 1960s, I talked to Mr. Giddes and Mr. Schlavis, both of them APUSH teachers here. Unfortunately, they could not join us for this Zoom meeting. But Mr. Schlavis did provide me with a quote, and he said, "The year 1968 comes to mind at this time. 2 older status quo type candidates for president. In 1968, it was the Vietnam War, whereas today it's COVID, a major national crisis paired with a major social movement that caused a paradigm shift." And I'm just going to address this now to Sarah. I mean, I feel like we're seeing history repeat itself, where we have a different situation. This time, it's police brutality. In the past, it was mass incarceration, civil rights, where Blacks are trying to achieve equality, but there are situations put in place by the government and just by society itself, less direct than slavery in the past and other types of ways, but still oppressive methods. And I feel like it's just history repeating itself over and over again.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think it's very important that my class is now getting the right to vote, and that we just took APUSH, and so we should be very, very conscious and educate ourselves further. I dropped history this year because I had to take more sciences, but that does not mean my history education stopped, especially now, where everyone's kind of being called on, but especially people who vote, to really educate themselves, because your vote is your power in your protest. And I'm definitely doing research these days a lot, even though my school year is ending. My social studies education on more contemporary issues is definitely just getting started. So, yeah.
And something I wanted to ask Ms. Volosin about, I took AP Lang with you this year, and we talked a lot about the power of language and the language of power. And I really think that in these types of situations, we're seeing language play a key role in how Blacks are portrayed, how other people are portrayed. So maybe you could talk a little about that and how maybe that could be at maximizing the situation that we have at hand.
Yeah, I had posted to our Google Classroom page even a couple of articles that had kind of picked up on this, with a woman in Central Park who had called the cops on the Black bird watcher. Christian was her last name. I'm blanking on her first name right now. But one of the things that the article talked about, and I think it kind of astutely picked up on, was how many times she said, like, an African-American man, right? That she felt threatened by this African-American man, as if using that qualifier was somehow justifying her call to the police, right? That she was using the identification of him as a Black man, you know, whether you're saying you're black or African-American, she was using it as a way to marginalize him, right? She was I kind of ironically trying to use the politically correct term, but still in a racist way, because the whole point of the label was to, I think, pit herself against this other person, to make the police side with her, and to heighten the situation that she somehow was feeling threatened. And so something as subtly as that, you know, this wasn't just being identified as like a man who she thought was harassing her or making her feel threatened, but that this was an African-American man, and that, again, that should have been enough of an explanation to the police for them to understand and side with her. And so I think that's a great example of, again, how language is being used. And it doesn't always have to be something as, you know, incendiary as like the N-word, right? Like, I think we all know, like, this word is a racist term, but that language can be used to create a power structure between two people in more subtle ways.
Definitely. And at this point now, I'm going to open it up to, I'll start with Josh if you have some questions that you'd want to pose.
Yeah, so like, I know this is kind of weird to jump right into the discussion, but I'm seeing a lot of petitions and posts on social media about police reform, and I saw this one very interesting idea from somebody I follow on Instagram, saying that communities should vote on police officers and vote who gets to, you know, be a police officer. And I just wanted to know what you guys think of that, because I thought it was pretty interesting.
Whoever wants to answer first.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't jump at the opportunity too quickly.
I'll take that one, because I think this is also a really good time to redefine community. And when you look at a community is based on having, and I say this in a way where control, meaning that you vote your elected officials, the people who you congregate with, the people you go to school with, what the school system looks like. You control that by taking advantage of the opportunities to affect your community. Unfortunately, those that live in inner city and impoverished communities, oh, by the way, poor is not a color, it's a condition. So once we look at those issues, these people they don't have access, they don't have the education, they don't have the time and or resources to impact the communities in that way. So long-winded way of answering your question, I think that would have some effect, There are a lot of barriers to entry there, but I think we do have, and policingequity.org is doing some really good work around this now, is that we do have to have better relations between the Black community and the police force. But a lot of times in the communities where they are, again, impoverished and poor, they are over-policed, and the police force then does not look like the people that they are policing. So that creates a tension. Last piece is, I'm all for that. But if we're voting for anything, let's vote that these police officers are required to have some sensitivity training, some cultural training, that they live within a certain mile, right, a parameter of where they actually police. You don't police here and then drive 50 miles to your house in Short Hills, but you're a police officer in Camden. Like, so that's the effective way of voting on this. It's not just as simple as actually voting for police officers, because then you're limiting your power.
Yeah,
I agree. I was like, yes, 100%.
Yeah, I think he brings up good points. And I think the point of voting, I don't know how I feel about voting for police officers, because I don't know if I have the knowledge necessary to decide who would be like a good police officer. You know, it's somebody saying like, well, why don't communities like vote on who becomes teachers? Because you don't have an education degree. Because just because you went to school doesn't necessarily mean you know everything about the system. So I think the issues that Tyrone brought up are spot on. Those are the things that need to be addressed. I don't know if voting on individual police officers would do anything other than politicize policing more than it's already been politicized, and perhaps make it more about optics than about creating actual change.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like in certain situations, I mean, we've heard so many people talking about the importance of voting, and I think it is important, you know, for local officials that have an influence in your day-to-day life. But like Ms. Volosin explained, I mean, certain things like with police officers, I think like sheriffs and positions like that, I mean, I think that's a good thing to vote for. But just an individual police officer, I don't know if I have the knowledge to specifically tell in that situation. But something I did want to ask Ms. Volosin about is something that Mr. Giddes and Mr. Schlavis both explained, because I know we're talking about big picture changes, but this is also the high school show and what us high schoolers can do at this time. And I just want to look at the quotes that Mr. Giddes and Mr. Schlavis both provided. I'll start with Mr. Schlavis. He said, "We have a major problem. No one listens to each other. Everyone rushes to yell and put their own opinion out there, but are far less actually willing to sit down and have the hard conversations." And Mr. Giddes said, "You can continue to listen and learn. Obviously, we have concerns about coronavirus right now for protesting and those situations, but listening and learning are very important. And when our community is able to be physically present with one another, you're equipped to be a piece of it." So Ms. Volosin, I wanted to start with you. I mean, what is the importance of listening and just understanding other people's opinions to make progress in this situation?
Yeah, so as always, Mr. Schlavis and Mr. Giddes, very wise. And I think I benefit from the fact that both Sarah and you have had me in class, so I think you know a little bit about how important discussion is in the way that I teach. I've actually been fairly impressed by students' ability to listen to each other with different political views and respectfully disagree. Sarah is always particularly good at this, you know, kind of listening to somebody else and saying like, I understand your point of view, kind of like, however. But I think that there is that communication really has to be two-sided. And I think too often it's, I'm going to say my point, I'm going to let you say your point, but I'm not really open to changing. I'm just going to wait until you're done talking and then I'm going to talk again. And that's not really communicating. That's two people presenting arguments that they already kind of hold pretty steadfast. So I think in terms of what we can do at the high school is we can create more space for that type of open discussion to occur. Places like history classes and English classes, you know, to discuss controversial issues, to kind of force kids to discuss controversial issues. I think one of the things we have to do first is get people outside of their comfort zone. You know, one of the, you know, maybe good things, but also bad things about Metuchen is it's a bit homogenous, right? We have a lot of people who come from similar backgrounds, have similar political viewpoints, and that can create a bubble at times that either makes people feel completely justified in their beliefs because everybody else around them shares those beliefs, or it can make people feel very ostracized because they're kind of the marginalized group who doesn't share the same opinion and they feel like they don't really have a voice. And so I think, again, the more that teachers can do, that the school can do to create safe spaces for students to discuss some of these controversial issues in a productive way, not a combative or a competitive way, is a great starting point.
Mm-hmm. And totally, I like how you mentioned the bubble, because I think that also kind of connects to how some people just think, oh, we live in Metuchen. I mean, it's a small town. We don't have these same issues here. But in reality, I mean, this is something that occurs nationwide. And I really think, I mean, it's really nice to see how various students have started to get involved, express their own opinion, but also have been very compassionate. I've seen a bunch of kids that on like their social media stories that have been sharing their opinion, but have also been saying, like, I want to hear about other people's opinions. I want to have a discussion with you. And I think that's really showing some progress that we're seeing right now.
Something interesting, I just came, like I said, from this town hall where we heard specifically from these two Black girls who basically announced, really, they said, I can't believe we have to talk about some of these things because you all know that something's going on. And I told them, you know, when I come on the show, I'm going to amplify what you guys said. And so basically what they were saying was a lot of times, like Ms. Volosin said, in the classroom, people don't want to talk about uncomfortable things, especially teachers. And when, you know, an incident happens, it's very like touchy. They don't want to stir the boat. They don't want to cause like, oh, a political or racial issue, and they don't want to be accused of, you know, making problems where there were none. So I think it's really important in the future that just because someone's a minority, that doesn't mean that their voices shouldn't be amplified. And you know what I'm saying? Like, just because I've never seen this or I've never heard of it happening, it's still valid, and we still need to address it, even though there might not be as often or as obvious as you would normally expect like racism to be. You know, like, oh, like that's racist because he said a word, but it's like, no, like that's racist because of how they made that person feel, and like the language they used wasn't necessarily like as blatant as it wasn't like Jim Crow, but there's still this ideology that's being passed on that you're a lesser person. And so that's basically what a small summary of what they were saying was, is everyone knows in this town what's going on. Everyone in our schools, everyone our teachers, everyone who's grown up here. And unfortunately, a man's death is what finally took for people on their social media, you know, to finally say, oh yeah, I don't like it when that happens either, you know. And you see people who maybe in the past have contributed to that and now they change. And we want real change. We don't just want people to say it. We want, like, behind the screen, when we come back, they all expect things to really be different.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about outside the high school, and I'll take this to Tyrone. How do you think us, you know, as a community, as a state, and as a country, you know, can just progress and go more than just, you know, announcing your opinions on social media and actually make real tangible change going forwards?
It's funny that you asked me that, because as you got hearing you guys talk, this has been on my heart to say, because the innocence in your voice and the clarity in your minds and how brilliant you are. So I will say this: your generation are going to get us out of this mess. I encourage all of you right now to find your leader, find your Martin Luther King, find someone that you believe in that communicates your message. The truth is this: my parents, even my generation, I'm 40 years old. Anybody that's my age or older, we failed you. Because America has been on a bad path. None of these issues have been addressed. We haven't had the hard conversations, but your generation is incredibly brilliant. You guys are connected. You have the power of social media. You are much smarter than any of us has ever been. So I encourage all of you to lead, to inspire, find your leader, encourage one another, support one another, leave an open space, connect, march, protest, vote. We need you. Because it's clear everything that has happened way before you guys got here, we didn't do it right. So we are leaning on you, and obviously we have a responsibility to support you, to do things like this. You reached out to me, I did not hesitate. I have two great nephews right now that are 1 or 2. I'm probably not gonna see the world change as much as I would like in my lifetime, but I need it better for them. And guess what? If they're 1 and 2, you're 17 or 18, you're going to be their president. You're going to be their vice president. So I think if this is going to change your generation, and you guys are an inspiration to us, it is amazing how you mobilize. It is amazing how you advocate. It is amazing how brilliant you are, the things you come up with. So whether it's in Metuchen, right, and even if it's on a larger scale, what happens in Metuchen is going to happen in America, and it's going to happen with your generation. So I would just encourage you all to continue to, again, mobilize, get together, inspire one another, and find your leader, find your Martin Luther King, find the person, find your Barack Obama, find whoever it is that you want to believe in that is going to allow you to do things that are going to change the world. And I want to end on this point. A lot of people bring up Martin Luther King. A lot of people are posting his quotes now. Two things about Dr. King that people leave out. When he was killed, white people in this country hated him. 86% of the people, white people in the country, did not like him. That's the first thing. Second thing is rarely known that he had a group of people that traveled with him. Mahalia Jackson, who was a gospel singer, who would sing, and she would inspire him. That I Have a Dream speech, she was off to the side. She told them, Martin, tell them about the dream. Tell them about the dream. She was pushing him to say that. So I say that to say the biggest, the strongest, the most powerful and educated among us needs a lift. They need people to push them to their greatness. And he was pushed to his greatness. We need your generation to do that same thing right now. Find your leader, push them to their greatness, and that is how America will change.
Very interesting perspective there, Tyrone. And I wanted to talk about, to finish things off, about tangible changes that can happen in America going forwards. And I want to start with Josh, because I saw in your social media story that you brought up something that not many people are mentioning that was actually prevalent in the Breonna Taylor incident, the Noknock Raids. Maybe you could talk a little about that.
Yeah, so basically, if you guys don't, you guys probably know at this point, but, you know, for a while now, police have been able to pretty much obtain warrants without the suspect knowing, and show up at that person's door or place of residence or whatever, and enter the place of residence, which is the house, without announcing presence, without identifying themselves as police, and apprehend suspects, search the house, whatever. And, you know, this sounds okay on paper when you look at why they made it, because the police are originally signed this to make sure that they could apprehend suspects without any, as we've obviously seen with cases such as Breonna Taylor, and then past cases like which was a fortune. So I think that to bring justice to both Breonna Taylor and Duncan Lamp and everyone else who's been affected by Noknock Raid, I think we really have to step up and talk to our local governments, maybe even the national government, and say, this has caused a lot more harm than it does good. You know, we can't have police charging people's homes at night.
Right. I think you're frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, until he's unfrozen, I had a question for you, Mr. Ross.
Because the people at their homes don't know.
Josh, you're having a little bit of connection issues.
Yeah. It just popped up like that. What was the last thing you guys heard from me? Yeah, because I don't know where to backtrack from right now.
I just had a question really quick for Mr. Ross. So obviously you graduated from Metuchen High School a long time ago, but we today we are still seeing like some of the same, not like a long time ago.
Oh my
you know
God.
what I mean?
Like
like a while ago.
No, it was.
But what I'm saying is, you know, like as a Black student at Metuchen High School, what's some changes or some systems or like policies and practices you wish were in place that you want us to put in now, or you want for your nephews if they had to go to our high school to have now?
That's a phenomenal question. I think the first thing is we spoke about policing and the teachers. It would be nice to have a greater diverse set of teachers, right? That look like my nephews, right? So that's incumbent upon the Black community to push more Black males to become teachers. So I think that's the first thing. I think the other thing here, when we look at the curriculum, there needs to be an expanded, look at the curriculum here. And I think what we were talking about before recording, Black history is American history. So I would like to see that as well. And I think the other thing, which is probably most important, and I know it was 23 years ago when I graduated, but I've been around the school every year since then. I was literally at the school earlier today working out, but what I've realized is there has been some, things around mental health, and unfortunately, there's been a huge change in the amount of school shootings. So I've seen you guys having to do things with that, which is sad. But I think also what's missing here, and I travel all around the country speaking at schools and going into inner cities and after school programs, there's a lack of tutelage and mentorship, sponsorship, whatever that looks like. And one of the things that I rant about often is if we're really honest here, and I had a conversation with the head of the Securities Exchange Commission yesterday, is financial literacy and financial education in America is a crisis. If we don't address those things, then none of these other issues are able to be solved. So I think that's the approach that I would take. Greater emphasis on financial literacy, definitely some mentorship for those that, like myself, I was the first generation high school graduate. I was lucky to graduate from Metuchen, and it was a struggle for me. Thank God for Mr. Holleran. And then also looking at the curriculum, and then teachers that look, walk, talk, and act like me to actually extend that curriculum and that lesson plan onto the students that actually take that class.
Definitely, and it's clear to see that there is progress to be made, but I think our generation is definitely capable of helping to fuel this. We've seen the outpouring over these past few days after the George Floyd murder, and we've seen how Sarah was talking about, how we've seen this Zoom happening today, a bunch of students coming together to discuss, as Josh mentioned, tangible changes that can be made, such as the no-knock raids, as Tyrone talked about, finding our own Martin Luther King, our own Barack Obama to help lead our generation. And as Ms. Volosin mentioned, the importance of communication, listening to one another, and just understanding the power of language, even when we're trying to be politically correct sometimes it doesn't come off the best way. So we have to be very careful with our language. Thank you to everyone for joining us today for the America 2020 panel discussion. We will have one more show this year. This will be coming in a couple of weeks to preview graduation. Thank you, Mr. Ross and Ms. Volosin, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. God bless you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So for Sarah and for Josh, and also a thank you to Mr. Giddes and Mr. Schlavis for providing us with some points. I'm Eddie Kalegi. We'll see you next time. This is the Metuchen High School Podcast, the online radio voice of MHS.